Thanks, Cassie.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. My name is Victor, and I'll be joining Cassie for this Q&A session. We are so happy that we have around 250 viewers right now tuning in. So thank you very much for your support. Shall we get into the questions, Cassie?
Yes, we shall. So, our first question is: what are the best practices for managing a pregnant employee who is frequently late and taking frequent leave, resulting in declining performance? From Irene. Okay, I'll take this one, Victor. So, basically, Section 41A of the Employment Act states that the company cannot terminate a pregnant employee unless it is for breach of contract, misconduct, or closure of business. So before jumping to termination, you want to look at why is she late, right? And taking frequent leave. Is it a medical reason? Is it just pure ignorance, right? You want to go to the root of that purported misconduct first before you decide how to manage it. If, for example, it is, I would say, due to illness or because of her pregnancy, then I would suggest that you take a more relaxed approach. Look into flexible working arrangements, look into reminders. However, once that is done and the problem still persists, then look into a formal disciplinary action. Victor, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think not too much, Cassie. I think you've covered a lot of it. But just for the benefit of the viewers, it's also important for you to distinguish between an act of misconduct and somebody's underperformance. It's important to do that because the processes are not the same. For the last hour, Cassie has covered the processes on managing misconduct, nothing on performance. I think this question is a little bit about performance. It's a much more subjective area in my opinion. But I feel that whenever we deal with pregnant employees, it's also important for you to understand that the court more often than not will have more leniency towards employees. That's the general rule. And if the employee is pregnant, then I think a higher degree of leniency would be placed upon that case. So there will be multiple questions that will be asked in this instance. For example, before the employee was pregnant, was she performing well? And this could be because of a temporary condition, i.e., the pregnancy, or it could be just for a temporary period and the company is taking action to the extent of terminating the employee. So, long story short, I would be careful with these instances. So part one of my answer would be distinguish whether it's misconduct or poor performance. Number two, if you really, want to manage this person, consider the fact that this could be a temporary thing and highly sensitive area.
All
Okay.
right.
Guys, I also realized that we have slides for download there. So if you all are keen to download Cassie's earlier presentation slides, you can scan on the QR. It brings you to a WhatsApp page, actually. We've posted the link for you to download the slides in the WhatsApp page. That channel is where we will be presenting our upcoming events, upcoming updates. Uh, and if you are keen to follow a little bit more about what we do, you can follow the channel. There is a bell at the top right corner. You'll have to uncheck that bell to receive instant updates. All right, let's go on.
All right, the next question, also from Irene. An employee has underperformed for 2 years despite verbal coaching. A formal 60-day PIP has now been issued. If there's no improvement, can we proceed with termination without a domestic inquiry? Again, Irene, two different processes. Here is more of a termination due to poor performance. And the general gist of it, just to let you know, where if you want to terminate somebody for poor performance, you're looking at has the skill gaps or has the underperformance has been highlighted to the employee? Were they given sufficient opportunity to improve? And despite the sufficient opportunity given to them, which I think here is your 60-day PIP, they have failed to improve. then you can look at terminating them for PIP. But that is a whole different process altogether. All
Okay.
right, next one. Why is it necessary to have domestic inquiry for misconduct leads to dismissal? Victor, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, I saw this question earlier from Rama. I think Rama runs a similar IR consulting firm. So thank you for being with us today. There are three parts to this question. So can I just request my colleague at the back to show all three parts? The second part is 13 sub 2 of the Employment Act stipulates any willful breach of employment contract can terminate the service without notice. And then the third part, is it fatal of the case if there is no domestic inquiry conducted where the case is referred to the industrial court? Okay, I will answer these three questions at once, and I'll try to keep it short. First and foremost, the Employment Act refers to a breach of contract. There are multiple instances in which a contract can be broken, actually both by the employee and the employer. So for example, if you look at 15.2 of the Employment Act, that's the clause that every HR practitioner is aware of, where the employee is absent for more than 2 days without providing reasons. So that's a form of breach if the employee is absent for more than 2 days. Another example of how a contract can be breached is if the employer, let's say, fails to pay salary to an employee within the stipulated time period. It could also amount to a breach. So multiple examples of a breach, and 13 sub 2, the section referred to in that particular question, give rise to the option for either party to terminate the contract of employment without notice. The topic today, we're talking about section 14, which refers to due inquiry in the case of a misconduct. Now, if someone is absent from work, in my opinion, that person could also may have committed a misconduct, right? You need an explanation from that person before concluding whether that person has committed a misconduct or not. So I'll give you two different scenarios here. Scenario number one, assuming that person has completely disappeared from work and you try to contact that person and you can't contact that person is not responding, then in normal cases, you will activate your abscondment process. In so doing, you're actually relying on a 15.2, 13.2. You're trying to say that this is a breach of contract and you want to terminate without notice. However, assuming you tell the employee that, or you send the employee a note to say that we haven't seen you at work for the last 3 or 4 days. Please let us know where have you been. The employee responds to you, and the employee says, "I'm sorry, I'm dealing with an emergency at home right now. I will explain." In my opinion, that switches that whole section from 13.2 into 14.1. So 14.1 is what Cassie has been talking about, which means you need to allow the employee the time and space for the employee to explain himself or herself. Potentially, if the reasons given are not acceptable and the employee is not admitting to the misconduct, you will have to go through a domestic inquiry to further prove your case. So the later part of the question refers to whether a DI is necessary and would it be fatal if the company did not conduct one. I think Casey has mentioned earlier that there are clear case laws to say that it's not fatal to your case. There has been a very recent case, if you are keen to read up on this case, let me know if you want the case. I have that case with me. It's called Mukilan versus IGC Industrial Galvanizers. This case is pretty interesting. We were very highly involved in this case. I was involved in this case in my previous workplace. And I was actually leading the team of consultants to investigate in this case. We decided that in a case of a theft, where there was a group of people stealing from the company, we decided to conduct investigations, and it was a conscious decision to go ahead with termination without a DI. And there was no clear admission in that case because in the process of investigation, a few of the employees who were involved in this crime, they got to know that a few people were testifying. So they went to the workers' hostel, they threatened some people, intimidated some people. Apparently, some of the people at the hostel got beaten up in an effort to sort of, quiet the whole situation down. They don't want them to say so much. So in under those circumstances, we decided that no, we can't wait any longer. We're going to terminate the group of people, even though we're not having a DI. So that case has recently been awarded by the industrial court, and it was mentioned there was a specific paragraph argued by the MTUC officer in court that there was no DI, and this should be a flaw in the process. But the court decided that no DI doesn't mean it's fatal to your case. What's important is you need to be able to prove the ingredients that has led up to the allegations of misconduct. All right, so I hope I've answered that. 3 questions in one. Can we move on to the next one? I see a lot of questions coming in. Thank you so much, guys. We'll try to be quick and answer as much as we can.
All right, the next question. The risk of constructive dismissal if we align medical benefits and annual leave of subsidiary companies acquired 5 years ago with group's benefit scheme. From a Mr. Dan.
You want me to take that, Cassie?
Yes, please. Why not?
Okay, Danny, my answer is the risk of constructive dismissal is yes and no. And it all depends on how you do it, in my opinion. So first and foremost is to determine what are the differences in the benefits provided between the old company and the new company. I wouldn't say that you need to maintain an apple to apple. That means, A to Z, everything must be the same or better. You could actually compare it in the aggregate. So example would be, let's say we're talking about 10 benefits here, 8 of which are same or better. And then there's 2 that maybe is not offered in the new company. You got to strategize around those areas to see if we were to make this announcement today, what kind of pain points would it cause? Would this be, something really fundamental? If it is, and you go ahead and bulldoze and not listen to any feedback from employees, then yes, the answer is potentially you are risking a constructive dismissal claim against you. Now, because you're in that situation, it doesn't mean that you cannot do so. So I would now be thinking about what ideas do I have to sort of successfully transition the employees across the old scheme to the new scheme. I can give you a few examples here. So if something is so meaningful to a group of individuals, I would try to maintain that for, let's say, a 6-month period, or maintain that for a 1-month period. But I'm giving them advance notice from today. I'm telling them that this will cease to exist in the next 6 months or a year. And I slowly phase that out. That would then lower your risk of a constructive dismissal claim, because you are not showing signs that you are intentionally or unilaterally breaching the contract of employment or the terms of the contract. So there are methods, in my opinion, and that's why the answer is yes and no. It's also a very sensitive area. First step, compare the benefits. Look at the threshold of severity that you're dealing with. Second step, determine what kind of employees are you speaking to. Are they the bunch that would understand why the company has to do this? Or are they, the fighters? If you know that they're fighters, then maybe you need to strategize what's best. Can I buy off? Can I buy off, meaning we'll pay you X amount that will cease to exist forever? Or can I transition over a 6-month, 1-year period? So all these are ideas that you can use to reduce your risk of constructive dismissal.
All right, thank you, Victor. We'll take the next question. Is unapproved absenteeism or working from home without prior approval considered under category of managing misconduct and subject to a domestic inquiry? Committee, this would depend on what the company deems as misconduct. So unapproved absenteeism is definitely a misconduct that has been supported by case law. Working from home without prior approval. So now that the EA has introduced flexible working arrangements, it would depend on the company's policies here. So if you have a flexible working arrangement in place, which allows working from home with no prior approval given, then it wouldn't constitute a misconduct. However, understanding from your question, I think it would also be considered a misconduct if approval is needed. So then, whether it subjects to a domestic inquiry would depend on whether the employee admits or denies the charges and what punishment you intend to give. So if it's just a first warning letter, domestic inquiry may not be necessary. However, if you're looking at termination, especially for unapproved absenteeism, then a domestic inquiry is highly encouraged. All right, next question. Can intern be the minute taker during the domestic inquiry? So here you're talking about the secretary. My answer would be yes, they can, because the secretary's role is just to record the proceedings and do the notes of proceedings. It is a key role, but it's not a role that cannot be done by an intern. So my answer would be yes, they can do so. Next question.
Just as a add on to that earlier question, guys, as a matter of practice, right? Nowadays, I'm seeing people doing away with the role of the secretary or the note taker at a DI. So try recording with your phone or get multiple recorders. And there are a lot of AI transcribing software that's available on the internet. Hook that up, you will get everything within minutes. Because if you get a transcriber, somebody's got to, put that headphone on and start typing for the next 3 days. So that's something that you want to explore. We've been using that and it eases, 90% of the workload.
Employee A has demonstrated poor performance and has taken more than 2 weeks of MC, medical leave. The company is considering the MSS to address the situation. What are the best practices for handling this? From Joanne. Victor, would you like to take this?
Okay. So if you're considering MSS to address this situation, this is pretty normal. It kind of shows that you've made up your mind that, okay, I don't want to deal with this anymore. I want to try to negotiate my way and get the employee to leave employment. Best practices, Joanne, in my opinion, would be you have to ensure that up until this stage, your PIP processes or your methods to manage poor performance must be solid, because in every MSS, you need to have a contingency plan. You need to remember that MSS is something that you are negotiating. There's no guarantee that you will succeed. But if you have managed your performance very well, I think that places the employee in a vulnerable state. The employee will know that if I were to pursue this, I won't go very far. I might end up being terminated. That's the kind of message or hidden message that you need to be sending before you approach your MSS negotiations. So if you're asking yourself right now and you think that you haven't managed the process very well, you don't have something very solid, I would say hold on to your MSS plans, continue with your PIP first, not to put unnecessary pressure or not to threaten, just to make sure that you have got your foundations covered. You have got all the legal requirements covered. That would place you in a better spot. Then once you are there, start negotiating with the employee. But you also got to understand that your MSS compensation package must be fair. The basis in which I normally use is I would consider the remaining amount of time that I will have to deal with this employee who's under the PIP. So assuming the PIP is the stock standard PIP program in your company is 3 months, and the employee's notice is 2 months. So what I will be having in my head is this 5 months is unavoidable if I were to continue. So I would use that as a basis, as a maximum basis for me to negotiate my PIP. If the employee is happy to go with 3 months, then yes, I look at it as savings. There's 2 months worth of savings. Otherwise, you would have tolerated for the next 5 months anyway. So in terms of negotiations, I would say make sure your foundations are solid first. If it's not, handle that first before you address the whole MSS. That's just a very short glimpse on um, how you should strategize. Of course, when you deal with MSS, negotiation skills, the way you position yourself, all of that would be important as well to successfully go through the MSS.
All right, next question. Hi, what is the acceptable time frame for us to conclude condonation? So if I understand correctly, is what is the time frame before it becomes condonation. So as long as you address it immediately, the risk of condonation is very low. However, in the event, let's say you need time to investigate, you need time to do all your preliminary, depending on the misconduct, 2 weeks maybe still be acceptable, 1 month still justifiable. There is no fixed period as long as you can justify that you have taken steps, then the risk of condemnation is lower. However, if you kept quiet and then 1 month, 2 months later, and you have nothing to show that you have done anything in between, that could also be deemed as condonation.
Yeah. Can I just add on a bit here, Cassie? I think that term condonation also means that you have, firstly, there was an opportunity for you to address that situation. And secondly, despite that opportunity, you did not act on it. Then it would amount to condonation. So I think first things first, if we are talking about, say, a particular act of misconduct that has happened for 3 years, and now it's facing, and now you're thinking about sending a show cause letter. Can you do it? The answer is yes, because while it happened in the last 3 years, you have got no prior knowledge at all.
Correct.
So that wouldn't amount to condonation. However, if you knew about it all along and you did not act on it, and now all of a sudden you're digging up the past and you're saying for the last 3 years you've been doing this, then yes, it would amount to condonation. So time frame wise, I don't think there is a solid answer as to, oh, it's 1 month or 6 months or what. I think it's really about whether you were aware of it and whether you had the chance to act on it and you didn't act on it. That would amount to condonation.
Next question. If the employee admits to the misconduct and the misconduct is serious enough to warrant termination, can the company proceed with immediate termination, or is it still necessary to conduct a domestic inquiry? So, Jeha, if the employee admits already and the misconduct is serious enough, don't go stress yourself to do a DI. Immediate termination is possible because the admittance from the employee is already really strong enough to proceed.
Yep. $1 million question. We get that all the time.
Yes, all the time.
Yeah.
Curious to know why 2 weeks on half pay during the suspension period by
Well,
Captain.
Karin, difficult question, Karin. The best answer that I can give you would be we need to time travel back to 1955 and try to imagine the time of the enactment of the Employment Act. Why would they have inserted a clause like this? I will try to answer this, but this is just my personal opinion. I feel that if you look into the definition of wages under the Employment Act, it keeps emphasizing on this phrase called payment for work done. So by default, the Employment Act is an instrument where if you work, you get paid. If you don't work, you don't get paid, unless it's covered under the provisions such as public holidays, sick leave, and all that. Now, just going on that basis itself, in my attempt to answer this question, I feel that the suspension period is a period where you're not working. While you are still in service, you're still in employment with the company, but you're not working. So it's unfair for you to be given 100% pay. So that's why, while under investigation, it's 50%. However, if you are not found guilty, then of course the company will have to reinstate. Otherwise, you suka-suka 50% of the pay. I feel that's sort of like the basis. I cannot be 100% certain, but that's my attempt, Karin.
All right, next question. Can we terminate staff if they misuse medical benefits, such as frequently taking medical leave, unless it becomes unpaid and often seeking traditional medical treatment from BOMO or USTAS? Okay, also another $1 million question all the time. So taking MCs within their entitlement, it has to be with a registered medical practitioner. So that's what the Act says. So which means that it's either your medical officers in government hospitals or clinics, or doctors who are registered under the Medical Act. So your traditional medical treatment of BOMO or USTAS would not count as an MC for sick leave, right? That will either be an unpaid or absenteeism. Now, if they frequently take MCs, it's a bit of a, you need to do a bit of investigation. You need to be a bit more sensitive issues because number one, you'll need to clarify if the MC is genuine. If it is and it's within their entitlement, you can't really take a disciplinary action. However, if it's frequent, then you can do things such as, maybe getting them to go for a medical checkup paid by the company or having a conversation with them to inquire why the frequent medical leaves. And once you manage that, even with a written warning or a reminder, then the steps you to take before and if it continues, then you can look into terminating. You don't terminate at the get-go. Is there anything else you would like to add, Victor?
Thereabouts, Nakasi, I think it's always a difficult situation. I think I would be quite strict and firm to say that we're not accepting anything else apart from a registered medical practitioner. And if necessary, you need to send for your own private checkups and things like that to get a medical report from the doctor. But it is a long process, and it can
Yes.
quite often get very frustrating.
And
Okay,
very
so
costly sometimes too.
yeah, so back up whatever documentations you have. Just make sure that everything is in written form so that if, one day you need to take an action, you need to do something a bit more serious, then at least you are backed up with, minutes of meetings from the past just to show that how long you've been dealing with this, just to show that you have warned, you have given caution in the past that we only accept MCs from these doctors and so on and so forth.
All right. Thank you, Victor. Next question. Can a staff from another company in the group be appointed as a panel DI member?
Yeah, I would say yes. Because more often than not, even in your terms and conditions, you would recognize the group of companies, it will be listed down. So even though there is no direct reporting line, even though there is no sort of, it's a separate entity altogether, as long as it's an independent panel member, I think that's sort of like the key word. There are some companies, even the MNCs, you will get, say, somebody from your Asian office, somebody from the China office or somebody from another office to come and sit in as a panel member. So I think that's perfectly fine as long as it's within the group. Right?
Yes.
Even now to address that, even if you want to get an independent external panel member, that's also perfectly fine.
This was a great session. Thank you, Sashana. Is there an instance where we can proceed with termination due to misconduct without a DI? Yes, there is. If you have done your due inquiry, if the evidence is strong enough, and you can prove on a balance of probabilities that a misconduct was committed, you can proceed with termination without the DI. Next question, please. If a company only has 10 employees, how do I conduct a DI in private condition? Do you want another non-related employees to be involved?
I can try to answer these questions. It's always difficult, Pelin, but some ideas for you. First and foremost, when you conduct investigations, preliminary investigations would more often than not be conducted by one or two individuals within the company. People will know, people will start to talk about, if somebody is suspended or if somebody is being called to the room on too many occasions, people will know that maybe something is going on or something is brewing. So first step, for the complainant, maybe you would want to address that situation and tell the employee how important it is not to disclose anything as it may interrupt with the investigation process. That is normally one source of how the rumors will spread, the complainant himself or herself. Step number two is try to conduct investigations out of the workplace. If you need to speak to this employee X or employee Y who's accused of the misconduct, you can do an off-site investigation, or you can have an online call. Actually, an online call is good because you can have the whole session recorded. Thirdly, you can consider independent investigators. So we do a lot of investigation work like this as well. You can speak to us about that. Or if you need to go to a domestic inquiry, then you might want to outsource the entire domestic inquiry. That means don't even do it within the premises of the office. Get, a private meeting space, rent somewhere in a hotel. Inquiry. Things can be contained a little bit more at the workplace.
Right. Thank you, Victor. If an employee, if a female employee is on maternity leave, can she submit her resignation letter without returning to work? Can the employer take any action against her in this case? So a female employee can resign during maternity leave, but as the contract of employment, she would have to either serve notice or pay salary in lieu of notice. The company cannot demand for her to return to work during maternity leave without her consent. So here is where the company would have to have a lot of discussion with her to say either she serves her notice, pays salary in lieu of notice, and see what is the best way forward for both her and the company. Anything you
Yep.
would like to add, Victor?
Quite straightforward, Kumati. You don't have a lot of options there. Employee has the right to submit their resignation anytime.
All right. Next question from Prem. Can a sales admin employee be expected to perform sales, selling function? Previously was not informed, but the company is going through a restructuring process. Training will be provided. Do we need employee consent? What if employee does not reach KPI? Can terminate after fair opportunity is given.
Okay, few parts to this question. Let me break it down. The first part is the term restructure. So I will deal with that first. So my answer to that is the company always has the right to restructure the organization in any way that the company sees fit, as long as it's not prejudicial to the interests of the employee. Right? So right to restructure belongs to the company. So can the company restructure? Can. Without restructuring, employee position will change from A to B. Training will be provided. That's good practice. Do we need the employee to consent? I think now we need to rewind to understand whether the employee's initial role is now redundant. Because as a result of the restructuring, if the employee's role is redundant, then there are two options, right? The first option is, of course, the employee to be retrenched. Second option is instead of retrenching the employee, now we are putting you in a new job function where we can train you. And hopefully you can perform. Now, if that first position is redundant and the employee is now being trained in the second position, in the new position, did not achieve the KPI, can terminate or not? The answer is yes. But if the original position is not redundant, the employee was merely just transferred into another role, trained, does not perform, now whether you can terminate, I think the duty is on the employer to reinstate into the previous position rather than considering termination. Right? So whether the role is redundant or not would play a big part in answering this question.
Next question. What is an acceptable notice period given to accused staff to attend a DI? This will also depend on how much the charges are, whether it's a serious misconduct, the amount of preparation, but usually a week or two is sufficient to be given to them to prepare for a DI. It can be shorter, but it will also depend on the facts of the case. Next question. In a domestic inquiry, how long should we wait for the accused to attend the DI? Let's say the DI starts at 3 p.m. but did not turn up on the exact time. How long can we wait? Can we proceed with ex parte or give another chance? Interesting question, one that we get quite often as well. I would say two things. One is do you know your employee? If it's someone that would retaliate, someone that you know would probably make an issue out of it, I would say give a fair opportunity. Maybe call, say, look, are you coming? Give another chance before you proceed with ex parte. That is just so that you cover all your risk. If it is someone that you feel would not show up no matter what you do, I would say don't wait so long. Give it to about 3:30. Proceed with ex parte. And if you feel that there could be really good reasons that the employee is not showing up, then if you want to give another chance, that is totally at the discretion of the company. However, it is the company's right to proceed with ex parte if the employee does not show up for the DI. Last question, Victor? Okay.
We'll take two more. We'll take two more.
Can
Yeah.
we have to stipulate the DI process in the disciplinary policy of an organization? It is recommended, but I would say do it very cautiously. You don't want to be too detailed because then it gives you a very rigid way of conducting your DI. But do maybe do an overview of the DI process in your disciplinary policy. That would be my answer to this question.
Yeah. I'm just for the record, I'm not a big fan of stating every single thing down in the policy, guys. I feel that when you have a lot, it's good, but it can somehow be restrictive in its own way. So I would try to be general to leave a bit of room for discretionary practices. That's sort of like my
Yes.
rule of thumb whenever I look at policies.
All right. Last question from Yan Lim. Often the stages of the disciplinary process from prelim investigation, suspension up to the domestic inquiry meeting may take too much time, where the accused may often say, I can't remember, and often involve too many parties, which is also a risk of sensitive and confidentiality of the case. What would be the most efficient way to organize and manage a domestic inquiry? Victor, would you like to take the last one?
Yeah, the question is difficult. The thunder, we can hear the thunder and lightning at your background, Cassie. Must be pouring cats also at your place.
Definitely.
Okay. I don't think that the investigation process is that long. I would say that when you conduct your preliminary investigations, normally you would have taken statements or notes from meetings. So while that whole transition, between that preliminary period right up until uh, the DI date, that could be, a matter of a couple of weeks or in some cases 1 to 2 months. I feel that the initial process where you start to take everything down, that's very important to ensure the transcript or narrative of the entire case. Uh, Employees, yes, they might say that I forget, or they change their story halfway through. You need to just refer them back to their earlier documentations and allow them to make some clarifications as to why they said this on a particular date and why have they changed their version on a later date. Okay, I hope that answers. I'm sorry, I think we have a few more questions. We might not be able to answer all of them, but we'll probably write to you separately, attempt to try to get the answers the answers all given to you. We have also posted something on the WhatsApp channel that I was mentioning here. Um, we are asking for you to help us decide on our next webinar topic. Choose the topic that you'd like to hear from us next month. Uh, there are some votes coming across. We've given you 4 topics there. So please, as a reminder, while you are downloading the slides from today's session, please help us by voting, and also make sure that you follow and uncheck that bell on the top right corner to receive updates from us. Okay, so I guess that's it for today. Thank you very, very much for everyone. You've been here for almost 1.5, 2 hours. I wish you a very good evening, and I hope to see you in person very, very soon. For those of you celebrating Raya, Selamat Hari Raya, and continue your Raya open houses in the next 1 2 weeks. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody.